Be Frankie.
Yeah, I'm striving for greatness, trying to make it out. We're stuck in the matrix. Yeah, I'm striving for greatness, trying to make it out. We're stuck in the matrix. Yeah, I'm striving for greatness, trying to make it out. We're stuck in the matrix. Yeah, I'm striving for greatness, trying to make it out. We're stuck in the matrix.
Yo, what's good? It's your boy BDELL. If you're new to this channel, hit the like button, hit the share button, hit the subscribe button, hit that notification bell. But today I'm going to give a definitive synopsis on how the deep state shadow government is trying to implement World War III with asymmetrical hybrid conventional radiological warfare, because the radicalization of the Canaanite beastman is at unstable heights. Now, remember I told you that everything operates on a seculum of a cycle by way of a fourth turning that is connected to the generational block theory. And I'm going to break it down intrinsically for you as I have this visual aid for you right here. Now, everything on a seculum of a cycle has to operate on an 80-year cycle. So first you get a high, which is 20 years. Then you get an awakening period, which is 20 years. Then you get the unraveling of the awakening period, which is 20 years. And that is the precursor to the crisis when you're talking about World War III, another form of pestilence, another form of a economic crash. So when you're talking about a crisis, this is basically the foundational blueprint for the abomination of desolation. So the generational block theory is an 80-year cycle that operates on 20-year increments. So you got a high, awakening, unraveling, and a crisis. So now we at the apex of a crisis because of solar cycle 25, right? Solar cycle 25 is when the sun is at solar maximum. And when the sun is at solar maximum, it has the ability to manipulate everything in third density. So this is where you get a war, a civil war, possibly. Then you also have the capabilities of having an economic crash, like I told you. Economy collapse. And then you have a pestilence, right? Because the pestilence in itself, the pestilence is basically the personification of the fact that it's a globalist agenda, and that globalist agenda is propagating the SEERS, which is basically severe intravenous epidemic respiratory syndrome. And that introvirus during that time period, they know that we're going to have a lot of people who are basically going to be seers. So they got to have a manipulation of your genetics and your neurological faculties to basically put an encryption over your mind and your physiology as we're in solar cycle 25 at the unraveling, which is the precursor to a crisis. So we're going to get into that as we get through the presentation, because not only is this a physical war, there's a spiritual war that's going on. So this is why pestilence during the time of solar cycle 25, because a lot of people are going to conform to the system, and once that happens, they're basically going to be led to destruction. So we're going to get back to the seculum of the cycle, the 80-year cycles, how everything operates on a cylindrical pattern, right? So get your notes out for this one, because this is one of those videos that's going to put a lot of stuff in perspective. Is going to give a lot of people clarification about what's going on within the factions of international law, within the factions of the socio-political aspect of civics, within the factions of, the secret societies, within the faction of the spiritual restitution. So we finna get into it. Now, when you're talking about Klaus Schwab, he is basically the head for the World Economic Forum, and he said we rebuild the world from ensuing chaos. we will rebuild the world from ensuing chaos, because chaos is a precursor to order, which is a totalitarian dystopia that's ran by artificial intelligence. When you're talking about Donald Trump and Elon Musk, so that's why I said that Donald Trump is a double agent, because once the deep state shadow government tried to manipulate everything during the process of Donald Trump's presidency, this one he is going to establish the order because he signed the National Declaration of Emergency Act. I'm finna give that publication here in a second. Now, all this is being facilitated by the deep state shadow government because Joe Biden, he's basically trying to jumpstart the war. Alex Soros urges Biden to ignite World War III before Trump has a chance to create peace, right? So Alex Soros is also a branch of George Soros. So Biden approves Ukraine's use of long-range United States weapons inside Russia, reversing policy. The Biden administration would allow and limited use of strike enemy positions in Russia, according to senior United States officials. So all this stuff is basically the inception point of how the abomination of desolation is going to be transpired. So you also have this publication here, breaking. Former top United Nations war crimes prosecutor Dr. Francis Boyle reveals bill of impeachment against Biden in order to prevent World War III. So, like I said, when you at the seclum of a cycle, when you at the apex of a crisis, you during a time of solar cycle 25, when the sun is at solar maximum, that spikes the Schumann resonance. The Schumann resonance has the ability to cause us economic crashes because it works in tandem with the precessional circle of the equinox that's also in conjunction with the cosmic clock. So everything has a time system. Everything has a purification system. Everything has a system of a reset. So once things start to reset, this is when you get a crisis. This is where you get another 9/11, right? We're going to get into that as we get through the presentation, because whatever the deep state shadow government has to do to basically manipulate and compromise the presidency of Donald Trump, they have to start the blueprint and the foundation right now as we segue into 2025. Now, I'm going to break this poster down. Now, this was in the Economist magazine, the world ahead of 2025. So what you're seeing is a lot of symbolism, a lot of sigilcism. So you see the eye right here, and it has a caution or a warning sign, right? So that's basically denoting the fact that during the time of 2025, we're going to have a pestilence. And then they have, economy going up because we're going back to the gold standard. And then you also have the hourglass, meaning that we're basically running out of time, because this is all connected to the I forgot what the clock is called. It is the doomsday clock. So it's actually 90 seconds to midnight, but during the time of 2025 it's going to strike 12. So that's when the system is going to reset itself to where they can implement a different establishment. Then you got this little thing right here. We already know what this is. And then you got the manipulation of the economic system. And then you got the revealing of other smart cars, as you know what I'm saying, because it correlates to the cybernetic dictatorship. Then you got Saturn here at the top. Saturn is also personification of Satan. Satan is an archon. Archons is connected to Yaldabaoth. Yaldabaoth is Chronos. Chronos is chronology, which is Saturn. Because Saturn is what keeps you trapped in time, which is a artificial time analysis mechanism of everything that's based on third density. Then you got the yin symbol right here. Then you have the yen symbol right here, which is basically in alignment to Japan. So you got all this stuff taking place, all the symbolism. They putting it right in your face, right? And then you looking at North and South exum at this globe, basically the unification process by way of the restoration of the matriarch and the republic, because North and South exum, when you study the Moorish paradigm, is basically giving you the blueprint that, the United States was one big, at one point in time, was one big landmass. When you're talking about Pangea and when you're talking about Atlantis and North and South exum, that's all in many different publications when you're talking about Astronomy, which is a Moorish publication. Now, this is where we get into the fun stuff, because this is also connected to the prophet of Daniel. When you go to Daniel chapter 12 verse 11. And from the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away, the abomination of desolation is set up, there shall be 1,290 days, right? So the inception of everything that started with the World Economic Forum was basically the process for the abomination of desolation that's set up in 2023. So everything that took place in 2023 was setting the tone and the frequency for 2024. Everything that was set up in 2024 is set up for everything that's going to be taking place next year in 2025, which is the year of the snake. The year of the snake is the year of alignment. The year of alignment is basically the year of chaos, because our alignment, our truth is going to dismantle everything that's connected to the physical world. It's going to, manipulate, policies and politics and rules and regulations. It's going to manipulate everything in all these industries that's being controlled by the Canaanite factions. So this is all applied to the 70th week of Daniel. You got the first 7, second 7, third 7, fourth 7, fifth 7, sixth 7, 7, 7. And the seventh year it was basically the personification of a land reset. So all this stuff that you see taking place right now is all happening during the process when Pluto enters Aquarius, when Pluto's in Aquarius. And you notice it goes all the way to 2043 right here, which is the 7-7, right? So that is basically in alignment to the 19 years of Pluto being in Aquarius, where you have the Aquarian age, which is basically the foundation of the golden ratio for the golden age. Now, all this is in correlation to the war and destruction of 7 years sprung up from them, good and bad, grievously, which is basically in alignment to Genesis chapter 41, verse 6, Daniel chapter 41, verse 6, and Genesis chapter 41, verse 27. So all this is in conjunction. So when you're talking about preparation for war, Ukraine, all this is connected to Zechariah, Isaiah, because one thing you got to understand about the Bible is a publication that's basically going to give you the blueprint and a timeline of eschatology that is basically being applied to the timeline that we're living in right now. So that's why Noble Drew Ali said, do not throw away your Bibles, because in the last days, you're going to need the Bible to condemn the European with it. You're going to need it, right? So during the time of Biden's presidency, right, preparation for war. Then we get into the inception points of the war in 2025. Donald Trump will still be the president. He's always going to be the president because he's the last president, right? Because I told you he signed the Second Declaration of Independence on July 4th of 2020. So that gave him full validity and made him commander-in-chief of FEMA, which is the National Emergency Act. And then you got the good in 2027, which is basically the blueprint of Reconstruction, the rise of the matriarch in full spectrum, in physical form. So we're going to start to see a lot of stuff starting to change during that process. So the game of chess, United States prepares next move with more B-52s warships to the Middle East, right? Now, this is all correlated to Daniel 11:40. The king Gog and Magog of the north shall come to America and destroy its 5 foundations, right? And its 5 foundations is connected to the 3 city-states, the Vatican, which controls theology. I think it's Washington, D.C. controls the military, and then you have London that controls the economic sector. So on Daniel chapter 11:40, and at the time of the end shall the Carmonians are basically the personification of Iran and Iraq. And then you got the Gentiles, who is basically the Canaanite factions of Esau, the Gentiles of the Amorites. Then you got Gog and Magog, which are also Gentiles, which is basically the personification of Russia and China. So you got to understand the bloodlines of how everything is correlated to the Bible, right? So shall come against him like a whirlwind with chariots. Chariots, we already broke that down during the last transmission when I was breaking down the UFO hearing, the congressional hearing with UFOs. So it talks about the planes, the drones, spacecrafts, and everything. So all this stuff is working in tandem right now. All this stuff we're going to be seeing during the time of 2025, which is a 7-year Passover. Now, now Putin plans to use Islam to spark World War III, right? So this is all correlated to everything when you're talking about Albert Pike, who was basically the founder of the Freemasonic regime. Or I don't know if he's the founder, but I know that he had a big hand inside of the Freemasonic order. So, it says right here, Illuminati, Albert Pike, the Third World War must be fermented by taking advantage of the differences caused by an ancient terror of the Illuminati between the political, you know that Z word, the leaders of the Islamic world. The war must be conducted in such a way that Islam, the Muslim of the Arabic world, and the political Zionism and the state of Israel mutually destroy itself. So, one thing you got to understand about the Z word, right? That is basically the personification of the deep state shadow government that is controlled by the Canaanite, the Amorite, or what you call the Gentile, right? The Islamic sector is basically the Carmonians of the Bible, who was Iran and Iraq. Then Gog and Magog is basically the personification of Russia and China, right? So all this is correlated to everything that Albert Pike basically said, how it's going to be engineered eventually. So I think I got a video to show you guys. All right. Because one thing you got to understand is that the great majority of everything within the factions of their system on how they're going to create this globalized reset or whatever. One thing you got to understand is that everything is actually premeditated. Everything is already, blueprinted out all the way for the next 100 years. They had all this stuff already planned out because they have a technology called the Chronos Visor that sits inside the Vatican. It has the ability to manipulate the space-time continuum to where you can see the future, the past, and the present all at the same time. So they have the ability to manipulate the simulation in the quantum world as well because they have that technology, right? So that's why I said that everything that you see and taking place right now within this simulation is all staged. It's a stage for the totalitarian regime that's going to be ran and risen up by Donald Trump and Elon Musk. But I got to give you this video to basically give you clarification on how the deep state shadow government is also working with the white hats, right? Because in order to get one blueprint, one agenda, you have to have both sides working with each other, right? So I'm going to play the video to give you some clarification.
Late. One of those hours where everyone's tired and mistakes are bound to happen. The room felt cold and way too bright, with harsh lights making everything look sharp and uncomfortable. Then Klaus walked in, quick, deliberate, like he already knew.
Now, this video is basically showing you that it's going to be, this guy is a whistleblower. He's telling you about the meeting that the World Economic Forum had with certain globalists and certain politicians. And he came in and he was basically saying, like, we are at the apex of the system about the reset. And he's basically breaking everything down of what he saw of what Klaus Schwab was doing at the meeting. So that's basically the criteria for the videos for those, for those listening. I don't want y'all to be lost.
Late. One of those hours where everyone's tired and mistakes are bound to happen. The room felt cold and way too bright, with harsh lights making everything look sharp and uncomfortable. Then Klaus walked in, quick, deliberate, like he already knew what was about to go down. He went straight to the head of the table, scanning the room as if he could read every thought just by looking. Then he spoke. The American dream. It's over, he said. His voice was calm, but had this edge, like he wanted to see how it would hit us. It's going to become the American nightmare. He stopped there, letting the silence stretch out, like he was waiting for someone to react. No one did. He leaned on the table, gripping the edge like he was bracing himself or holding something back. His hand shook, but it wasn't fear. It was more like adrenaline. Like he was fired up, maybe even thrilled, and the whole room could feel it. Nobody said a word. He started laughing. Short, jagged bursts of it, like he was startled by his own audacity. It was unnerving. His eyes darted around the room, locking on each of us, searching for any hint of doubt or disapproval. He seemed electrified by the unease he was creating, feeding off it like a parasite. Then came the most chilling part. He described his vision. A nuclear detonation, carefully orchestrated to shatter the world's old structures. We must burn the house down to rebuild it, he said, his voice trembling with a fervor that bordered on madness. From the ashes, we will forge a society in our image. A world where humanity is no longer a chaotic mess of free will, but a symphony of controlled efficiency. The room was silent. No one dared challenge him. He and his cronies had planned every detail, a global catastrophe that would destabilize nations, erase borders, and force humanity to kneel at the feet of the new order, his order. I left that meeting knowing one thing for certain. This man wasn't just envisioning control. He was lusting for it, and he'd stop at nothing to achieve it, even if it meant dragging the entire world into the abyss.
So, like I said, that gave you some clarity about what's going on because, like I said, everything is premeditated in the simulation. We all know that by way of gematria. When you understand the Vedic numerology aspect, everything that correlates to the binary code system of the matrix system. So, everything's premeditated. They have the technology. They understand gematria. We know this. We understand gematria, right? So, one thing you got to understand is that, one thing that we like to do is identify patterns. In 1913, a criminal cartel took control of a nation's monetary system. Respective families of this cartel buy and build media outlets as well as politicians to push the United States into World War I. So this is actually taking place right now in real time, right? Everything operates on a seculum of a cycle that is connected to the generational block theory that I broke down in the inception of the video. It's an 80-year cycle. Everything operates on increments, right? And operates in fractions, right? There's a process that takes place. Then, when you fast forward to the 1920s, the war is over. Everyone gets back into the market. The cartel crashes the market again. When you're talking about the 1929 stock market crash, the Great Depression of the 1930s, the cartels buys up everything for pennies, need to stabilize the economy, Emergency Bank Act of 1933. And then this is where they created humanoid real estate, right? And that humanoid real estate is also in alignment to the Social Security, which is a QSIP number that has a community uniform security identification procedure. And those QSIP numbers is connected to the 3 city states that controls your straw man: the Vatican, London, Washington, D.C. This is why everything has to reset, because we're going back to the gold standard. This is also a part of, the economic factions of everything that's taking place within the Great Awakening period. Because during the time when you have a crisis, just like I said, when you have an unraveling, you have a crisis. That crisis can be an economic crash, a 9/11, another war, a civil war. All these things have to unravel to basically transduce the old system into a totalitarian system that's based on mental and physical control, right? So it says right here, under the executive order of the president issued in April 5th, 1933, all persons required to deliver on before May 1st, 1933, all gold coin, gold bullion, gold certificate. So everything was gold based until the stock market crash, right? Because we all know that the cartel was part of, the factions of the Canaanite. When you understand who they are in the history, that's a whole different story. Now, this is why Sweden is telling their own citizens to prepare for war. 5 million households get pamphlets on how to get their home ready for nuclear Armageddon, as Biden is accused of trying to start World War III, right? So the deep state shadow government is basically trying to sabotage the presidency of Donald Trump, but it's all being staged. Donald Trump knew this stuff was going to happen when the time he was in presidency, because whatever the deep state shadow government is going to do, they have to implement everything that they need to do as far as like a form of covert operations. They have to implement it in order to get Trump to take over the regime in full spectrum in order for him to be prime minister or king of Israel, whatever you want to call him. That's when he was going to get those titles, those pseudo forms of nobility. So it tells you right here in the leading report, breaking. President-elect confirmed that it tells you right here, declare a national emergency, because I told you, anybody who controls FEMA controls the military. If you control the military, you still the president. That's why I said Donald Trump was going to still be the president if we have an election, right? Because whoever controls FEMA controls the military. The military is being controlled by the person who controls FEMA, because Donald Trump signed the National Emergency Declaration for FEMA, and he has the ability to deploy the military on the citizens or the deployed military all around the planet, right? Because they work in synergy with the United Nations, right? So the military assets to reverse the border crisis on mass deportation program. So that in itself can basically spark a civil war on American soil at the borders, right? So we have a multitude of things. We have a multitude of socio and political aspect of afflictions that's taking place on America. Now, we're going to get into this here in a second, but I got to show you this video. Because we in that time, ladies and gentlemen, we in that time period. Because for those who don't understand what's going on, before I play this video, you need to understand this. You need to understand the generational block theory, an 80-year cycle block, an 80-year cycle block that operates on 20-year increments. So you have a high, awakening, unraveling, and then you have a crisis. We're at the apex of a crisis because we're at the apex of a seculum of a cycle in solar cycle 25. When the sun is at solar maximum, this is where you get war. This is where you get economic crashes. This is where you get civil war. This is where you get a pestilence. When you're talking about the SEERS or the severe intravenous epidemic respiratory syndrome, because this is where they're going to hit you with these draconian juices, because they don't want you to get the transmission from the sun in solar cycle 25, and it's going to manipulate your physiology, and your neurological faculties at the same time. Also, you cannot negate the fact that the year of 2025 is the year of the serpent, the year of 9. The 9 is the personification of completion, the completion of a system, which is why we have a crisis that creates a reset. You're going to have a 9/11. It's going to happen. So prepare for it, right? I'm not trying to scare nobody. I'm not trying to, fear monger. A lot of people have to start using their the discernment at a supreme level. None of this stuff that I'm telling you is fear mongering. It's basically getting you prepared. I know all this stuff is going to happen. I'm not scared. I'm already, I'm prepared for what is to come if something was to, transduce into that type of energy. But like I said, this is a time for preparation. It's not for you to get scared and scared and you start going to church and all this other BS, right? We're in a time right now where you got to get very focused and you got to be understanding and look at everything from a critical standpoint. Because one thing that's going on right now within the factions of everything that's taking place in all these industries, everything is symbolism right now. Everything. I mean, it has been everything with symbolism, but now literally everything that they put out is a form of symbolism. And I'm going to show you that in the movies. And the symbolism is basically creating this dynamic on your subconscious mind to basically embark those energies that's going to happen in real time, if you see what I'm saying. But I just had to give you that rundown because we at the apex of a seculum of a cycle. We're going through reset. So reset doesn't also is not only applied to. Hold on a second. Reset is not only applied to the pole shift. A reset can just a hard reset on the system. That's what's going on. So many different industries, many different enterprises and businesses and organizations, they all have to fall. So I'm gonna show you this video for a second. Where's my video? Hold on for a second, guys. Let me get this video back up here. Hold on. Hold on for a second while I get you guys this video. Get this video up for you guys. All right, here we go. So now, like I said, this video is basically giving you a full rundown in the news media about what's going on.
That the Russians are reporting that Ukraine has now used these attack and ballistic missiles. More on that later.
Yeah, it looks like an escalation is coming. Okay.
This morning, Ukraine fired U.S.-made missiles into Russia for the first time. That's according to officials in Moscow. The move comes just 2 days after President Biden gave Ukraine permission.
And a major escalation on the 1,000th day of the war. The attack comes just 2 days after the Biden administration gave Ukraine the green light to use the weapons against targets inside Russia. The White House policy change comes after North Korean troops were deployed to help drive Ukrainian soldiers out of Russia's Kursk border region. Overnight, Russian President Putin signed a new doctrine saying any major aerial attack against Russia could prompt reprisals with nuclear weapons. A spokesperson for Putin says this adds fuel to the fire.
This news comes a few hours after Russian President Vladimir Putin said the country has a right to respond to an attack like this one with nuclear weapons.
Putin has a new warning for the United States after President Biden authorized Ukraine to use long-range missiles supplied by the U.S. to strike inside Russia.
The Russian anti-missile system apparently downed 5 out of 6 of these missiles. And the Russian Defense Ministry says Ukraine hit Russia with these missiles.
Feels like a significant escalation. Does the U.S. and the U.S. actually, and President Biden gave the blessing to Vladimir Zelensky to use these very big missiles a couple of days ago. Does that come with the guarantee that if Russia escalates, the U.S. is there to protect them?
Well, I think that this is a slew of questions that we do not yet have the answers to, Francine. And just to recap some of the news that we just got in the last few minutes, because this all feels fairly significant, is what we got from Vladimir Putin was signing into a decree allowing Russia to fire nuclear weapons in response to any kind of massive conventional attack on its soil. That would include drones, that would include presumably long-range missiles, that Russia would view aggression against itself or its allies by a non-nuclear state backed by other nuclear powers as a joint attack. In summary, basically saying that if there was an attack on Russia by a member of a coalition that will be seen as an attack by sort of the full coalition, i.e., even if it's a non-nuclear power aided by a nuclear power, that would be seen as a joint attack. This is something that Putin has been talking about signing into as a decree since September. This is officially happening now.
The fact that we knew that Ukraine were going to be able to use these missiles in a slightly different way, was certainly with a further reach. This perhaps comes as no surprise. The fact that Russia says that these missiles have been used, can we believe them here?
It's extraordinary because of the pace here. I'm not sure it's necessarily unexpected to some degree, because we have known that Ukraine have been in possession of ATACMS missiles like this to hit targets inside of occupied areas of Ukraine. And so in theory, I suppose the target list would have already been in their possession, and this simply being a matter of Kiev deciding that they wanted to use this new US permission. But it comes on the 1,000th day of a war so full of unexpected moments here. And I think we are now going to have to see whether Ukraine steps forward and officially acknowledges that this indeed was an ATACMS missile launching this particular strike just in the last 48 hours. President Volodymyr Zelensky has sort of hedged that, generally saying, look, we're not going to necessarily announce this. Missiles will speak for themselves.
I needed to interject for a second for clarification purposes. One thing you got to understand is that the deep state shadow government is not only applied to a form of liberalism and democracy, it's also applied to the Ukrainian mafia. And the Ukrainian mafia is also known as the Khazars. The Khazars are known as the nomads. The nomads are wanderers. The wanderers are Saturnians. Saturnians is part of the factions of the Canaanite. So everybody got to understand something. One thing that Donald Trump and Putin is trying to do, they're basically trying to exterminate the vermin off the planet, which is basically the parasitical faction, the parasitical bloodline that controls everything behind the scenes that's being controlled by the black nobility, right? but it's all premeditated because they both working for both sides. So just like Donald Trump is trying to drain the swamp in the United States, Vladimir Putin is trying to drain the swamp in Ukraine because Ukraine works in tandem with the Democrats. They're a part of that bloodline, right? I had to give you that clarity because a lot of people do not understand what's going on an international level and how it's applied to everything that's taking place here on American soil. I'm going to play the video.
Well, certainly that news has indeed emerged. What could Russia's response be? They have been unclear at this particular point, previously warning that if these missiles were fired by Ukraine, supplied as they are by the United States, that would essentially be NATO, the US and Europe joining the war, becoming a party to the conflict. Putin has not reiterated that himself since this, but indeed his foreign ministry made similar noises. So it's a key moment here, certainly.
Vladimir Putin appearing to threaten to use nuclear weapons if Ukraine fires American-made missiles into Russia. The Kremlin saying the doctrine was updated in response to what it calls the new situation. The new Russian policy essentially authorizes the use of nuclear weapons in response to what it calls, quotes, critical threats of aggression using conventional weapons. Now, remember, President Biden lifting restrictions on the attack on ballistic missiles, which are, of course, conventional weapons, essentially allowing them to be fired into Russia. Putin has made nuclear threats before that have proved to be hollow. A senior Ukrainian military source telling me this is blackmail, but also warning nuclear weapons are a Pandora's box that shouldn't be opened. This move likely aimed as much at President-elect Trump, who's promising to end the war when he takes office, but it'll make that all the harder.
Несложно предположить географию ответа в случае, если короткий пресс-релиз Белого дома станет реальностью. Под угрозой без малого все европейские столицы. Если наши ракеты встанут в Калининграде, Берлин, Варшава, все Прибалты, Париж, Бухарест, Прага. Конечно, американские базы в Германии. Гармии Шпартенкирхен, казармы Патча, Шпангдален, Рамштайн. Особое внимание Британии, нашему традиционному врагу, так как против нее будет работать значительная часть Северного флота. Под удар Вашингтон ставит не только Лондон, но и Манчестер, Бирмингем, крупнейшую военно-морскую базу Девонпорт, Клайд в Шотландии, где король хранит ядерные ракеты Трайдент, Портсмут и Чатамскую верфь в графстве Кент. Британия в самом уязвимом положении. В принципе, достаточно 3 ракет, и эта цивилизация рухнет.
Just quickly, Russia's also threatened nuclear escalation. Are you comfortable with that when people at home are watching this, worrying that you could put us at risk?
Well, it's very important. It's very important that we're steadfast in our support for Ukraine. Russia is the aggressor,
Even
and
if unleashes nuclear war.
Russia has to be the one that makes the move to stop this war. It's within their gift, but we must support Ukraine. It's impacting not just Ukraine; it's impacting the rest of the world, including the UK.
Is your message to viewers back home that there will not be a nuclear war because that is what Russia is threatening?
My message is that we need to ensure that Ukraine is put in the best possible position. This is 1,000 days of conflict, and there is a very high cost if Russian aggression is seen to pay off.
A remarkable series of events, starting with President Biden, with this major change in policy, allowing Ukraine to use these longer range missiles inside Russia. And then what we saw was Putin signing this declaration, revising the nuclear doctrine that you mentioned, that would it basically declared that a conventional attack on Russia by any nation supported by a nuclear power would be considered a joint attack. And then we see Ukraine using these long-range missiles. It's yet to be seen what Russia's response will be, but this would obviously be seen as quite an escalation by Moscow.
Yeah, look, I mean, they saw the American decision as an escalation. The Americans saw the decision by Russia to station North Korean troops on the front lines as an escalation by Russia. And so we have that ladder, people continually climbing. I'm not sure really what Vladimir Putin's statement today in his amendment of the nuclear doctrine, outside of the scariness of the words amendment of the nuclear doctrine, actually necessarily does. It essentially says that conventional attacks by multiple parties against Russia could potentially lead to responses by Russia towards those parties. It's nuanced, highly nuanced, but it's part of a pattern that we've seen where Moscow feels potentially under threat, or feels it has to make a sort of bombastic statement that it reaches for the phrase to remind people that it is indeed a nuclear power. Do I necessarily think this means that Vladimir Putin is getting ready to launch nuclear weapons? No, certainly not. He appears to have shied away from that significantly over 1,000 days of war where Russia has experienced multiple conventional military defeats. Indeed, it's been invaded by a much smaller army, Ukraine, in just the last 4 months. But I do think it's a bid by them to try and please a domestic audience who might be wondering exactly what juice Russia has left at this particular moment. And I think it is his way of suggesting that this is perhaps Moscow's response. Do they necessarily have the military might to take on NATO in full? Well, almost certainly not. They're struggling to defeat Ukraine. Do they necessarily have the desire geopolitically to inflame this conflict? Remember, China is a key ally in here and probably doesn't want to see that happen ahead of a Trump presidency. So I think if we do see outside of this statement by the Kremlin head, Vladimir Putin, any further responses from Russia, you might end up looking at sabotage. There have been many accusations that Russia's been behind exploding packages and courier depots. Indeed, we have reports from Lithuania and Germany that undersea internet cables towards Scandinavia have been damaged in the last 48 to 72 hours. That's, I think, where we'll potentially see this exacerbate, but it'll be in no doubt here at all. We're into a very different part of the war here. American-made and supplied weapons are being fired into Russian territory. That's a place that we frankly never imagined we'd get to 1,000 days ago.
The Biden administration just approved the use of American-made long-range ballistic missiles by the Ukrainian army to strike targets within Russia. In response, Russia says it will react with nuclear force if any of those missiles land within Russian territory.
You have the Russian president up until now warning the West of dire consequences should the US or the UK, for that matter, grant the Ukrainians the permission to use these longer range missile systems. For the US, it sees it the ATACMS ballistic missile. For the UK, it's the Storm Shadow cruise missile. That should they grant that permission, that they are playing with fire, that they could trigger a global conflict. And it's no coincidence, therefore, that the Russians today are announcing or finalizing what was already in the planning, this lowering of the threshold of when Russia would consider using nuclear weapons in response to an attack. Under this updated doctrine, the Russian military could resort to a nuclear strike if the country is under conventional attack. And which is a lowering with, for example, the kinds of missiles that you're seeing at the moment, which is a different change of words before the caveat of when a nuclear strike, a nuclear retaliation would be considered by Russia was in response to a nuclear attack or a conventional attack that threatens the very existence of the state. Of course, we know, and British and American officials repeatedly say that that Russia does not want a nuclear war because there would be no winners, but clearly an incredibly important and worrying.
Now, one thing you got to understand about what's taking place, what took place during I think it was in the 1930s or 40s or whatever. I think that a lot of the oligarchs, they started a meeting. They had a meeting with these beings that came from the caverns of the earth. When you're talking about interdimensional extraterrestrials or galactic federation, there was a meeting and they said that they almost cracked the earth during the last war. Now, you fast forward to 2020 and 2019, they had a secret meeting in Antarctica with the Galactic Federation, right? I'm going to break that down as we get through the presentation. I'm going to incorporate that that information at the end of the presentation. Now, so now this is where, this is how all this stuff is being staged. Donald Trump, he basically selects co-founder Linda McMahon for education secretary. So she was basically a part of the wrestling federation, right? So what you're looking at is a stage show. This whole political system, the left and the right wing, it's all a stage show. It's all WWE. It's all wrestling, right? It's all premeditated. It's all staged. And I think that he's basically trying to, signal at something by hiring these actors, basically. Now, this is where we get into the economical side that works in tandem with the geopolitical and societal economic reset. In the sound of the trumpet, money, gold, silver, the money changers, usurers shall be destroyed, right? So the trust must be destroyed. Everything that's connected to Wall Street, it all has to crumble, right? So this is why when you look at this publication right here, the Pentagon just failed its 7th audit, and it says it cannot account for what is 824 billion budget is spent on, right? Then you got another publication. Pentagon can account for 4.1 trillion in 2024 budget, sparking fears of another 9/11. Because we all know that war or a tragedy basically intensifies the economic or the financial infrastructure of everything in Western civilization. Because during the time period I remember during the time of 9/11, we started to see a manipulation in the stock market. People's houses started to foreclose as we went all the way up into, I think it was in 2008 when we had a recession. So that was basically like the crumbs off the table from that incident that happened with 9/11. But like I said, we're at a crisis right now. We're at the second of a cycle, in solar cycle 25. Another tragedy has to happen in the year of the serpent. Now, when you go to the sealed portion, it talks about the final statement of so-called Jesus Christ, chapter 90. So for that, when you see that in the Bible, it's really talking about Thoth. Thoth is basically an esoteric codex for thought. Thought is a form of ether. Ether can materialize in physical form. When you encapsulate those thoughts inside of geometrical shapes, that's basically the blueprint of manifestation. That has nothing to do with the presentation. I just had to incorporate that. So for that, Thoth, the day 2021 to 27 out, all the world shall be under one monetary system, which shall be controlled by the rich, which is the monarchy, the oligarchy, and the plutocracy. And when the Lord devalues the worth of all things, everything in third density has to crumble. The house of cards have to crumble. So your favorite celebrity has to fall. Your favorite politician has to fall. Your favorite CEO and business owner, TD Jakes, almost being unalive, at the pulpit. All these things have to come to pass. There shall be no more gold, no more silver, no more paper of any kind in that day, right? Because like I said, a cybernetic dictatorship is for a universal based income. So it's going to come a point in time where you're not going to be working for money. You're going to be working for time. Literally. You're going to be going to work. You're going to conform to the system. You're going to go to work. And you're going to work for how much time you're able to be out during the day. So let's just say that you put in 40 hours a week for working. You're not going to be compensated with money. You're going to be compensated on how much time that you get to be outside. That's what it's going to come to, right? Because during that time period, they're going to make it illegal for you to be outside because you're going to have so much pestilence, right? During that time period. Because during that time period, once that happens in full spectrum, I think that we have been made physical contact with other intelligent life forms, right? And they're going to be living amongst us. So that's a whole different story, but let me get through the presentation. Now, woo! I hope you're ready for this one. Now, I brought this publication up in one of my transmissions when I was breaking down Let Chaos Begins when you talk about Donald Trump when he got elected. So when you're looking at this guy right here, he is basically an emulation of Donald Trump. Dr. York put out this publication in the 1980s. It is called 666 Leviathan, the Beast as the Antichrist. So the beast is, for those who don't understand, the beast is the Canaanite factions, the Canaanite bloodline, which is the Gentiles. When you're looking at all these people, all these political leaders, all these world leaders, they're basically comprised of the Canaanite factions who control world policies all around the world. So if you notice at the bottom right here, there's a leopard, because the leopard is a metaphysical codex for leprosy. Because the Canaanite in the book of Leviticus, chapter 14:33, it talks about how the Canaanite was cursed with leprosy, right? Leprosy, leopard. So this is why they put the leopard at the bottom, the leopard body, and you have the Canaanite bloodline running the totalitarian regime, right? A cybernetic dictatorship ran by Donald Trump. Now, remember I said something about the leopard. Now you fast forward to the Denver airport mural. It shows you the leopard being laid out, because the leopard is basically the personification of the Canaanite that controls everything within Western civilization when you're talking about economics, movie industry, music industry, because the people that start with a J, right, they are the ones who control those industries, the movie industry, music industry, food industry, pharmaceutical industry. They control every industry on the planet because they're comprised of this bloodline. It's the Canaanite, right? Anything that has 6 ether recessive genetical traits are basically the blueprints for the Canaanite bloodline. Those are the attributes of the Canaanite. So you see the leopard right here, and then you got the indigenous woman right here at the bottom, right? Because the indigenous woman has been castigated by society because she's been taken out of her sovereign capacity, because she's under a lunar doctrine, which is a lunar light-like frequency that put an encryption over the woman's metaphysical energy and her power to connect with the divine matriarch that took her out of her divine matriarchal energy. And this is where they instituted patriarchy, and patriarchy made the woman masculine. So now she's not in her feminine energy, because they know that the feminine energy is basically the blueprint of how you have reconstruction within everything that's connected to Western society. So you see the leopard. The leopard represents the Canaanite, right? Got the leopard body, leprosy, leopard laid out. That means that the end of the 6,000 year curse has reached its apex when you're talking about, let me share my screen for a second. When you're talking about a crisis, you had, this is the inception, precursor, then you got the crisis. The crisis is at the end. So the 6,000 years is up because one thing you gotta understand is that the generational block theory works in tandem with the precessional circle of the equinox. So now that we're in a crisis, right, with the apex of the sun cycle. Hold on. I think I lost my. Okay, we at the apex of the sun cycle. So when that happens, that's the people who was running everything under patriarchy. They have to fall. So this represents the fall of the Canaanite, the fall of Babylon, right? Fall of mystery Babylon, ran by the Gentile, Amorite, the cursed seed of Leviticus chapter 14:33, cursed with leprosy, leopard body, Donald Trump. Now you look at the leopard right here. Same thing transpires. Then you got the rising of an indigenous people in the background. All this is esoteric symbolism that is applied to everything that's taking place right now. And this is located in the Denver airport. And I'm going to do a definitive broadcast on a full breakdown of the mural, of all the murals in Denver airport. Then this is another part. The great Ankh is the great awakening. You got the indigenous woman right here, and then you got the tourist, and the turtle is a representation of Turtle Island. Then you got the phoenix rising for the ashes. So this represents reconstruction, as you have the divine matriarch rising back to the top to basically overthrow patriarchy. This is why you see the indigenous woman with the turtle, which is personification of a matriarch, Turtle Island, Atlantis, right? We back in that time period. So I had to incorporate that. And the reason I had to incorporate that, because the true Lord of the Bible is actually Thoth, the time of the great day, the great dreadful thing. So it talks about the apocalypse of the 12 calamities and the coming of the Messiah. Because during this time period of the desolation, right, there's going to be a rise of a messianic figure. So, like I said, it could be, I know a lot of people talking about the 144,000 is not a group of people, it's a frequency. We already know that. I already broke that down many different times. 144,000 is also applied to the 144,000 crystals in the brain, which is also known as the magnetites and the dendrites, because crystals, they absorb information and they extract information and they upload information into the neocortex, right? And that neocortex works in tandem with the third and fourth ventricle of the brain. The third and fourth ventricle of the brain is how you're able to manipulate everything in the space-time continuum within the factions of your reality. So the 144,000, there's going to be a 144,000 people to tap into the frequency of 144,000. So that's why I said there's going to be a messianic figure, because when you get the 144,000, you're really talking about non-ether. Non-ether in itself is a form of cosmic convergence. That cosmic convergence of everybody together is the Messiah. It's not one person. It's the galvanization of a people who have a certain frequency, a certain mindset to basically divorce themselves from the system because they reached the state of godhood on a supreme level, right? So I already knew that shit, that, 144,000 is not subjected to a group of people. I already knew that, right? You ain't got to tell me that. Reason I do what I do for contextual purposes. I gotta give people a frame of reference, because everybody is not where certain people are who watches this channel, right? So the apocalypse of the 12 calamities and the coming of the Messiah, cosmic convergence by everyone who will understand, will be wise at the time. The calculation of the day. So now, this is why I said that pay attention to the movies. Everything is symbolism right now, because everything they're doing right now is telling you what's going to happen in the year 2025, so on and so forth. So they just came out with this movie called Wicked, right? We all know that Thoth is also El Qadir. El Qadir is the personification of the green one. The green one is applied to the witch in this movie. The green one is also an emulation of the heart chakra, because when you tap into your energy, that's when you're able to perform alchemy, which is what they call witchcraft in the movie, right? So when you watch this movie is basically giving you the blueprint of the dismantling of the old system, and you have the revamping of the new system. See, this W right here is really an esoteric sigil for World War III. You see the W, you turn it sideways, you get a 3. So this movie has a lot of symbolism, because one thing you got to understand about the old Wizard of Oz. Wizard of Oz is basically the personification of how they subjugated your sovereignty by way of having a straw man. The straw man that's connected to everything that took you out of your sovereign capacity, right? Which is why they had the crow in the movie. The crow was representing the straw man. And then I'm not sure for the whole full breakdown, because I know a long time ago somebody did like a full breakdown of what Wizard of Oz really meant. But Wizard of Oz in full spectrum, and basically means the illusionary system that's controlling humanity. So this is basically, this new Wizard of Oz, the prequel to this movie, is Wicked. So this is basically the precursor to everything that's taking place right now, because when you have a reset, you got to reset the old system that was in the Piscean age of darkness under the lunar cycle, and then you have a new system to implement. Wicked is the personification of the new system. The old Wizard of Oz movie is the personification of everything was under the age of Pisces, which is the age of illusion. So Wicked is basically the blueprint for everything that's taking place right now. So it's not a coincidence that they had a black woman playing the Green Witch, right? So I'm gonna tell you, you cannot make this up. Then Donald Trump picks Dr. OZ to run Medicare and Medicaid office. Dr. Oz, Wizard of Oz, Wicked, right? There's a connection here. There's a connection here when you look at this from an analytical standpoint. None of this stuff is an accident. None of this stuff is a coincidence. Because Donald Trump, he's revamping the old system by way of reconstruction with the revitalization of the matriarch. So Wicked, new system, which is a totalitarian order. The Wizard of Oz movie represents the old regime that was under the factions of the three city states, London, Vatican, and Washington, D.C. Military, religion, and the financial infrastructure. That's what that basically talking about. Right? So, and you also had there was a meeting they had in Antarctica not too long ago. In 2020 or 2019, they had a secret meeting. You had the oligarchy globalist regime. They met with the Galactic Federation, and they said that if you guys do not create this reset, we're basically going to have these Nephilim, these beings come to the surface, and they're going to have a smorgasbord, which is basically a mass sacrifice, which is a form of a great purification period. And that sacrifice, they already got a mural in Denver Airport showing you about there's a spiritual war that's going on. So it's not only a physical war that's going on, we got a spiritual war that's going on. You're going to see beings on the surface of the planet coming from the bottom of the caverns of the earth, and they're going to be coming to the surface in a mass sacrifice event. Excuse me. Right? So they had that meeting in Antarctica with the Galactic Federation talking about you can't have no more wars. You got to get rid of your system. Your system has took away the energy of the indigenous people, and you got to give it back to them. Right? That's why they went to Antarctica. That's why they went down there and had that meeting with them. So this is why we're going through that reset. So it's not a coincidence that scientists discover evidence of ancient rainforests in Antarctica, because Antarctica, in the inception of the precessional circle of the equinox, it was a sun cycle. In the sun cycle, it wasn't no ice, right? So since it wasn't no ice, it was a tropical rainforest. It was a tropical rainforest that was inhabited by indigenous people, right? So it's not a coincidence that this also works in tandem, because like I said, you're looking at a multitude of wars. You got a war with the deep state, and you got the war with the deep state versus Donald Trump. Then you got Ukraine versus Russia. Then you got the 144,000 chosen ones that's connected to the bloodline of the positive factions of the Anunnaki are getting these upgrades to basically combat this energy right here. Because of some of us, we're going to have these abilities. These abilities is going to come on. It may not happen in our lifetime. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? Don't get me the line or whatever, making up stuff or whatever, because I'm not going to make up nothing. But it's going to come a time, a lot of people are going to have a lot of special abilities, and they're going to be able to basically go to war with these entities that's coming from the surface, from the bottom of the planet to the surface, right? These are what you call your fallen angels, right? Or your cherubim, 200 fallen angels of the Bible, right? So you got Kissinger's final warning: prepare now for superhuman people to control the earth. We're in that time right now. Just like in the movie Wicked, she had those abilities. Everybody need to watch this movie. She was performing alchemy. They said she was a witch. I broke down the Salem witch trials in my October Halloween breakdown. It was called the Sam Hammond event, right? And then you had those witches. They had those metaphysical powers, and they was lynched for them. So, and then you also got all this stuff, because all this is correlated to the Earth's magnetic field that works in tandem with the magnetosphere, the stratosphere, the mesosphere, and it hits our atmosphere, these energies. So the Earth's magnetic north poles moves toward Russia in a way scientists have never seen, right? Because that's all happening because we're at the second limb of a cycle. We're at solar cycle 25. It's going to create an influx of magnetism, right? And that influx of magnetism is basically going to create an intrinsic energy inside the planet, which is basically a collaboration of iron. Iron is what makes everything highly magnetic because it's a form of plasma energy, right? So this is my little blueprint that I got. So you got everything that's transpiring in 2024, sudden escalation between Russia and the United States, potentially triggered by cyber attacks. War begins with the first military clashes in Europe and the Arctic, right? Because everything that's applied to like a cyber attack, we're talking about an EMP or CME that's being projected from the sun. Then you got 2025 conflict grows. NATO, which is the United Nations military factions, join the war with Russia in attempts to gain allies. Then you go to 2026. China joins the war, either directly or indirectly. 2027, nuclear weapons on the verge of use. Then you have a ceasefire, and then you on 2028, you have a ceasefire talks to fail due to deep-rooted distrust, global financial markets collapse. Then you fast forward to 2029, the total stalemate of the United States and Russia return to negotiating table to end World War III. World faces a reality of a global rebuilding after the devastation, which is a form of reconstruction. During that process, you're going to have the rise of the matriarch. And then you also cannot negate the fact that this works in tandem with the sustainable development goals for agenda for 2030, right? So everything that you're seeing right now, they got to start right now. We are knee deep in the shit. We in the shit right now. So 2025 to 29, just preparing for 2030. 2030 is full spectrum cybernetic dictatorship. Full spectrum. Now we're gonna get into some stuff that I got from Dr. York's publication, L's Holy and Jill, which is a transliteration of the Book of Revelation, right? Because the King James Bible of 1611 A.D. is a mistranslation, and the 10 horns which you saw in the beast, and these nations that loved her will turn to hate her. So the beast, those 10 horns that he's basically talking about, he's talking about this. This is what he's talking about, right? Shout out to Dr. York, Freedom Master Teacher. The 10 horns. And it tells you right here, verbatim. For the first time ever, a world war will be fought on American soil. Nations of the world will fight a fierce war against her, bringing destruction never felt in the shores of United States of America. Americans inhabitants have never experienced the degradation and the loss of war as European nations have felt. It being tucked off of the other side of the globe to protect itself from an attack. But now the very countries it has assisted financially and militarily have artillery by which to wage all the war on the United States. Then during that process, you're going to have the galvanization of the 144,000. That's what that's basically talking about right here, because it talks about how Anu, Allah, or El Elyon, El or Thehos, where you get the word Thanos from in the Marvels movie. Allah are the ones that live in a lifestyle of the evil one, but have been taught about their true selves to regain the godlike knowledge. So this is where you get back into your supreme being aspect, because you can only tap into that energy by self-realization, right? So you got to go from a neophyte to an adept to a master. When you master yourself, this is where you tap back into being a supreme being, which is basically the personification of the 144,000, which is basically the sigil of Tahuti when you have the tetrahedron, a triangular shape that sits on the apex of your forehead. Because one thing you got to understand about a triangle has 60-degree angles. 60 times 3, that's 180 degrees. You get two triangles, which is a hexa alpha or a tetrahedron. You get two triangles together, that is the sigil of Tahuti or the Most High. And the sigil of Tahuti, the true Lord, that is 306 degrees of knowledge that sits on the apex of your forehead, right? That is the sigil of the Most High. That is basically in physical form. That is the 144,000 in the form of a symbolism. It's a hexa alpha symbol. So here it tells you in the Revelations 17:17, third entity of the evil reptilian triangle, the triad, the trilateral connection of the Us, the Irish, and the Italians, which is basically made up of the state of Israel, because I already broke that down how the Celtics are Irish and the Irish are Druids and Druids are Canaanites and Canaanites are basically comprised of the cursed seed that controls the state of Israel with the United States, right? Tells you how their kingdom is going to be crumbled. And then it tells you right here, like I said, we're going to go through another form of pestilence. Revelation 18:8, just for the plagues will come in one day, and the plagues will come all at once. So this is why I said we're going to be hit with asymmetrical biochemical warfare, right? They're going to hit you from all sides. It's not only subjected to asymmetrical biochemical warfare, you got asymmetrical, hybrid, conventional, radiological warfare, right? They're going to hit you from every which way. So this is why you're going to have a collaboration of famine, pestilence, earthquakes, wars. All this stuff is going to happen during this time right here, right? The age of crisis. So with that being said, I'm going to give a brief rundown for those coming in. Just a quick little rundown, So since we're in a time of excuse me. Since we're at the time of another 9/11, this is why, Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum, he said we will rebuild America from ensuing chaos, right? Because chaos is the precursor to order. And this is why, Joe Biden, he's trying to implement World War III to basically destabilize the presidency of Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a double agent. I proved that in the last transmission, right? All this stuff has to happen. It's already premeditated. Albert Pike, who is a Freemason, everything's premeditated. Everything operates on a seculum of a cycle, 80-year increments. It all applies to the financial infrastructure and things of that nature. So this is a very important video because a lot of people do not understand what's going on. Because one thing you got to understand patterns, and you have to understand cycles. The cycles is applied to the generational block theory, which is an 80-year cycle block. First 20 years, you got a high, awakening, unraveling, then you have a crisis. The crisis in solar cycle 25 could be a war. It could be a civil war, a world war, economic collapse, a form of pestilence. I already broke that down, right? So this is the time, like I said, you got to get your shit together, because whatever's going to happen is just going to come out of nowhere. It's going to hit you like, damn, this shit just happened. We were just on lockdown. We about to go lock down again. This is why you must, as an individual, you must lock in. The hell with the lockdown. You lock in and tap into your higher energy, right? Because when you tap into your higher energy, this is when you tap into the Zohar body. The Zohar body is the personification of your spirit of Melchizedek. Your spirit of Melchizedek is Thoth. That's Tahuti. That's you. That means that you have the ability to basically detach yourself from the outside world by going within. Everything's internal. We don't care about external stimulation. We become the vibration. That vibration becomes magnetism. When you get that magnetism, that's when you basically divorce from the system in totality, right? By speaking truth. Because the truth basically manipulates everything in third density, because ether basically dematerializes the photon light spectrum of everything in third density. So this is why the house of cards have to fall. You have to have another 9/11. You have to have another calamity. You have to have another world war. You have to have another civil war. Prepare for it. That's all I'm saying. Get you know what I'm saying? This is the time where you must get in alignment. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for watching this video. End of transmission.